Title Pro 7 comes with a considerable number of ready-made lower third templates. These are obviously very handy when you want to use lower thirds but don't want the hassle of designing them yourself. However, if you're like me, and if you have the time, there's nothing like the feeling of satisfaction when you've designed a title from scratch. Title Pro 7 allows you to do that. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate some lower thirds that I've designed starting from a blank canvas. I won't be going through the process of creating such a lower third because that would take too long. I'll simply go through their elements and describe how each element interacts with other elements to produce the final result. Welcome to this, my 17th tutorial. For this tutorial, I'll be using Title Pro 7 standalone. I'd like to start by showing you some of the lower thirds that I've designed and created from scratch. I'll open the library pane. Go to the folder called My Lower Thirds, and in this folder I have a subfolder called Work in Progress. I'll just show you these lower thirds one at a time and then concentrate on one of them. Now what I'd like to do is to bring one of these in onto the timeline. Double click that to bring it onto the timeline. And I want to go through each of the stages of creating this lower third, one at a time. To do this, I will need to hide certain elements initially and just leave this top element visible. From the beginning of the timeline, you'll see that I've got a rectangle. This is a rectangle, believe it or not, with, I'll just open the global tab. Pull this one down. In fact, I'll switch off the library pane. This top line has a thickness of 0.3. And I've set the position so that the middle of it is about where I want the middle of the box to be. I've set these dimensions so that the X position is at the edge of the screen, and from the beginning of the timeline I'll step through this one frame at a time. We can see that the line is being extended in the X direction, this parameter here. And just to briefly explain how that is achieved, at the beginning of the timeline I set, bring this one back, I turn on keyframing, which adds the first keyframe. I talked about keyframes in tutorials 6 and 16. So turning on the keyframing generates a keyframe at the beginning of the timeline, and then I move the cursor to where I want the transition to finish, extend the line to the place that I want it to be extended to, and in doing so that generates another keyframe. The result being that over those 6 frames the line extends to where I want it to end. Now after that's extended, I need another element. I've just called this the bottom line. It's a good idea to name these elements, and you do that by right clicking and selecting rename. Name them for what they're going to be used for. Now at the moment this bottom line doesn't do anything. It's the start of the element, so you can't really see it. So if I now move along, click that to make it visible. Forgot to make it visible. Right, start again. You can see that I'll just take the focus off that bottom line so that the green outline isn't showing. And that is where I want the width or the height of the lower third to stop. So over those next 6 keyframes, the 2 lines have opened out to where I want them to be. Now the next thing to do is to generate another line here, which is another rectangle with the same thickness, and I've called this the end line. If I now come back to there and make the end line visible, and cursor right, you will now see that the end line extends in length to the next keyframe. And these keyframes are all generated by placing the cursor at the beginning, generating a keyframe by turning keyframing on for these 2 elements, which is in the global tab. As soon as you turn the keyframing on, it generates a keyframe there. Then you move the cursor to where you want the transition to stop. Extend or move the bottom line to where you need it to be, which is a mirror image of the top line. And that will automatically generate a keyframe there. Similarly for the end line, if I just hide those 2, with the end line at the beginning of the element, turn on keyframing, generates keyframe 1, move the cursor to where I want it to finish, which would be the same as where the two other lines finish, and extend the line to the required measurement. That will then generate automatically a keyframe there. So now we have the box, or the frame should I say, which goes from a line extending across to, there I go again, forgot to switch on the visibility, the line that goes across and then opens out, and the end line closes the frame to there, and then it stays there. Now the next thing I wanted to do was to put the text in here, but if I just put the text in there, then that wouldn't do the job, because this is what would happen. The text is always showing. So what I needed to do then was to create a text mask which will slowly reveal that text after the frame has been created. So I put a text mask above the text element, move that back, so now the text mask is visible. When you do things like that, you must move the cursor, because as you notice there, the text was still visible even though I'd made the text mask active. Now the text mask is simply if I go up to effects and just turn the masking off, the text mask is simply a rectangle, a coloured rectangle, and this rectangle is the same, in the same position and the same dimensions as the finished frame. I'm just going to turn that back to a mask, and if you want it to hide something, you must put a check mark in the invert mask checkbox. That will make sure that when you move this text element, when you move this mask element across, it will reveal what's underneath it. So if I just show you how that works now, get this back to the beginning. Now just about there, the text mask is going to start moving across the screen. And if I just show you there, hover over there, you can just see where the text mask is. That will keep moving across until it reaches this keyframe, and then it stays static there. This ensures that if you have a long text string there, it will completely uncover that text string. Right, so that's dealt with the revealing of the text within the frame. The next thing I wanted to do was to have a background to this text so that it stands out against the the frame, the scene underneath. That's where these two elements come in, the background mask and the text background. As you can see, the text background, I've got an image there. The background mask is, if I just open that up, I'll just close these down temporarily. And you can see that the background mask is the same as the frame, and also the same as the text mask. And now if I come back to the beginning of the timeline, and open up that text background eye, and so you always have to move the cursor, because as you saw then, when you make an element visible, it temporarily is visible when it shouldn't be. So I will now move the cursor. I'll take focus off that background mask so it doesn't encroach. Now as soon as we get there, I need to open up the background mask. And opening up the background mask reveals the text background, and then the text is revealed. Okay, so that's the intro. A little bit complex, but achievable. What I wanted to do then was to create an outro that is a mirror image, if I can call it that, a mirror image of the intro. So I needed to draw a mask over the text to cover it up gradually, and then collapse all these elements the same way as these elements were expanded. To do that, I needed to create this sort of pattern at the end, similar pattern at the end as was at the beginning, and then create some keyframes in the same place relative to the intro. And to do that, I needed to go to the position that I wanted the first keyframe to be, which is this one. So that is equal to that relative. And to do that, to generate that keyframe, I would go to the Global tab, highlight the element, go to the Global tab, click on the keyframe that I needed to replicate, right click and select copy, then move the cursor, the playhead, to the place where I want the keyframe to be, and then click the plus button here, which adds the keyframe. And similarly with all these, do the same thing with all these. Just to copy these keyframes. It's a good idea while you're doing this to regularly check that it is actually doing what it's supposed to do. And the result of all that is a lower third that expands and contracts. Now just a word about the pause point. When the title length, that's this length here, is greater than the timeline length, which is this value here, the pause point acts as a delay equal to the difference between the two values. This makes sure that the title plays out fully to the 10 seconds length, even though the timeline is only 3 seconds. Just another thing to mention while I'm here on the timeline is that it's very important that the relationship between these two values here is correct. The title length must always be equal to or greater than the timeline length. If the timeline length is greater than the title length, then transitions at the end of the title or the end of the timeline will probably not get displayed. This is because the title length is less than the timeline length. It's always better to have a timeline length that will just give you enough time to include all the transitions that you want to include. I covered the timeline in more detail in tutorials 5 and 14. Another thing to be aware of is the position of the pause point. The pause point must always be between the extremities of the transitions, of any transitions. One exception is if the timeline length is equal to the title length. Then it doesn't matter where the pause point is, the cursor will go straight through. Consequences of having this anywhere other than between transitions, I'll just demonstrate that now. You'll find that the transition freezes for the delay time. So always ensure that the pause point doesn't encroach on any transitions. As with any lower third, any element of the lower third can be modified to suit individual circumstances. For instance, the text background, which currently is this green image, can be changed the text can be changed obviously like anything else. Colour, font size, and also the lines, the bounding box for the lower third can be changed from white to any other colour. We can also make certain elements variables. This is especially useful with multi-title management, where you have several titles, all of the same design, but you want slight changes to that design. For instance, the text background can be made a variable. Normally, the only variable that's declared is the text. So text can be changed for individual titles while maintaining the title design. But if I just check this box here, variable box, then go to the Scene tab, you'll find that this has now been declared as a variable. So that can be changed for individual titles. Now what I want to do is to show you another lower third design that's similar to this one but isn't as complex. I'll load the one back in again. Now as you can see, that one operates as we've seen. This next one is similar, but you can see the difference in complexities. This one looks more complex than this one. And in fact it is, because what I've done with this one, I'll just load this one in. What I've done with this one is to use a rectangle as the frame. I'll just close these ones down so we can see the rectangle. Just a basic rectangle. The difference being is that the opacity of the face is 0, so effectively it's transparent in the middle, and it has a outline of white, and that's this. Now initially when I did this, I wasn't happy with the fact that you couldn't get the line to be anything different to this because of the outline. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be similar to the other one. So what I had to do was create another element here which was still a rectangle, but it wasn't transparent in the middle, so it didn't have that sort of a loop effect. So I used that element to extend to the end, and then I froze it for 2 frames before I started the rectangle with the outline. And what that did is it saved me having to have the 2 elements plus the end element, as in the other lower third. Excuse me. I'll just open these back up again. The mask, I only used one mask in this one. because all I wanted to do was open up the text background beneath the text. So I used one mask, this mask, which opens up in the same way that the rectangle opens up. If you remember in the previous one, the mask opened up the text background, but after that the text mask revealed the text in an horizontal fashion. So I cut that one out to make this a little bit easier. And again, to make the outro, I did as I did in the other one, just copied the keyframes across and the elements across. Only one thing more to do now. When you've created your masterpiece is to save it to the library so that it doesn't get lost. And to do that, make sure all these are opened up, set to visible. Open your library up, go to Project Templates, go to your folder and save it using this little icon here. Call it a name, obviously not test 2. I've called mine Animated Outline 01, Animated Outline 02, etc. Just look at this final one, which is similar but a lot easier. This is just opening up a rectangle and using a mask to reveal the text and the text background. Well, I think that's probably enough for this tutorial. You can see that creating titles from scratch can be challenging, but I hope that I've shown you the techniques to enable you to at least have a go. All the tools are there to allow you to create really eye-catching titles. What's needed from you is time, patience and creativity, the latter probably being the most important. Thank you for watching. Until the next time, bye for now.